We all stand for the prayer, thanks. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today. Pay my respects to the elders past, present, future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. You may be seated. I must advise you that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. The only one I've received is from me, and it's in relation to item 13.1. The brief description, it's non-pecuniary, less than significant. The brief description is the owners are known through early school years, and my action is to remain in the chamber and vote. Ms Squire.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and/or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, section 375A, requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council, excuse me, under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act.
Thank you, Ms Squire. Apologies, we have one. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move the following recommendation. The Council move, receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Cameron and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM5, there are no mayoral minutes. Action plans 6.1 to 6.4. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress. And 4, long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Routine matter.
Thank you. There are no questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Confirmation of minutes of previous meeting held on Monday the 24th. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 24th February 2020 at 6:09 be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that item. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no reports from community forums, no notices of motion, no presentations and deputations. CM11, reports, minutes of committees and working parties. CM11.1, the minutes of the Local Safety Traffic Committee. Councillor Stutchbury.
I move that the minutes and recommendations of the Local Traffic Committee meeting held on Thursday the 13th of February 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, your light's on to ask a question. Did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, I'd like to ask the question first, please.
Okay.
My question is to the relevant member of staff. At this meeting, we had 2 new representatives of the RMS, and as has been... what are they
Traffic
called
New
now?
South Wales.
Traffic.
Transport New South Wales.
Transport. Transport New South Wales. 2 new representatives, and as per usual, Transport New South Wales surpassed themselves with I'm not sure how to describe it, but on a particular matter, one of the 2 was particularly obstructive, and that relates to the pedestrian crossing on Creek Street. Is it Creek Street? Yes. Now she promised in a Transport for New South Wales kind of way to get back to us on that issue, and I'm just questioning whether she has indeed done so.
Thank you for the question. Mr Ferris?
Through you, Mr Mayor. No, we haven't had a response yet. We sent off a reminder late last week, so we'll follow it up again early this week, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Councillor Stutchbury?
Look, this is not a question, this is a comment. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is a fairly dangerous pedestrian crossing, and all we're asking for is some brightly flashing lights so that oncoming cars are aware that there's a pedestrian crossing there. And this person from Transport for New South Wales was frankly obstructive. In the meeting, she was obstructive, and now her non-response to this request is further evidence of her obstructiveness. Now, I think we need to do more than just remind them. I think we need to be proactive in this matter. All we're asking for is a flashing light to potentially save a pedestrian from being run over by a car. And she wants to make sure that it meets some Australian standard that doesn't actually exist, except in her own mind. So can we please get on with this and be proactive in getting this matter finalised?
Councillor Stutchbury, I'm sure we'll send them a strong response through my office and Mr Ferris's office and try and get a direct response. I understand your concern about safety there. It is a crossing that's sometimes missed by motorists that I've witnessed. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question to the members of the council or staff that were present. Was there any mention of the proposed red light camera and speed camera on Barella Road and Young Street during that local traffic committee meeting?
Councillor Stutchbury, did you want to try and answer that question?
Oh, I'd love to, but I can't remember. Mr Ferris, was it mentioned? No.
Thank you. I just need that on the public record because that's the way Transport for New South Wales treats people in Albury. I've had experience with these people before, especially around the left turn on reds in this area, that a personal opinion of one at that stage, I think it was an RTA employee. I'm having...
Is it a point of, is it a comment or is it a grandstanding or what? Forum for...
Councillor Vanderman, was there a question?
Yeah, there will be a question coming.
No worries, thank you.
So we've had issues before with Transport for New South Wales, as they are now known, having their personal opinions with regard to traffic issues. So my question is to the relevant member of staff, can we write a letter to Transport for New South Wales requesting that in future we be consulted around proposals such as this, including the placement of red light cameras and speed cameras in our community, so that the local traffic committee can actually do its job, which it's supposed to do by its charter, and it has a state member present.
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we can certainly write a further letter. We've previously, in the past couple of weeks, sent an email to the relevant authority around consulting with us with regard to this matter, and in particular that we had a local traffic committee meeting a couple of days before the announcement and it wasn't raised at that meeting.
Just a quick follow-up,
Yep.
Mr Mayor. Has
Mem-
the work on this red light camera installation commenced?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm still waiting for implementation. No, it hasn't commenced. My understanding is that some of the infrastructure will be installed over the coming weeks. It'll be tested in April and go live in May following the standard warnings that they'll give to our community around the installation of it.
Thank you.
Councillor King, do you have a question?
Question through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Stutchbury. About 3.5 years ago, Councillor Stutchbury, you raised the ability to turn right from the left-hand lane of the freeway, and traffic was continually being banked up into the 110 zone. Has there been any progress on this matter in the last 3.5 years that you're aware of?
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you for the question, Councillor King. Despite the fact that they've since been renamed after I first requested this rather minor alteration to the lane signalling, the lane marking at the particular intersection Councillor King is speaking of is the southbound exit from the freeway onto Barella Road. No, Traffic for New South Wales have, did I get it right? Transport for New South Wales, formerly known as RMS, and before that, I don't know what they were called. RTA, that's it, yeah. And what were they before that? I don't know. Yeah. No, they keep on coming back to us with vague comments like, "Oh, this is a much more difficult process than you think of, than you think it might be," which clearly it isn't. So no, they're stalling on that as well. Look, they're completely non-responsive to local matters. Transport for New South Wales. The nearest office is in Wagga. They think that Albury's part of Victoria. They don't care. I mean, have they even changed the traffic light signals on the corner of Hume Street and Wodonga Place yet after the freeway's been open for 12 or 13 years? No, they haven't. They're not interested. They don't care.
Thank you for that point of view. Mr Ferris, you might have an update in relation to the southbound exit. I think we had a discussion about that recently, did we not?
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Recent local traffic committee meetings before the one in February, they indicated that they were undertaking some designs and potentially had funding available to make those changes. Yet at the meeting that's before us tonight, the representative there was unaware of that and couldn't give us an update at the time.
Thank you. Councillor King, question.
Another question through you, Mr Mayor, to a member of staff. Notice that there's been some work on the off and on ramps on the freeway, I think on night shift. Do you get notified by Transport New South Wales, that these type of activities are going to occur?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we did get notified. The notification period was pretty short. I'd have to take it on notice the date we received that notice. But yeah, the time span was reasonably short between being notified and the works commencing.
Councillor King.
Through you, Mr Mayor, to probably Mr Ferris again. No doubt aware that I've been quite passionate about the condition of the freeway and the rubbish and the overgrown grasses and those sort of things. Would you be in a position to write to Transport New South Wales and ask if they could give us further notification, and we might be able to then combine the use of the traffic lane being closed to clean up the grubby freeway?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's certainly one of the initiatives that I've already brought up with Transport for New South Wales, and that we could coordinate some activities there to minimise the disruption to the traffic and maximise things like traffic control, which they estimate as 50% of the cost of the project.
Thank you. Okay, councillor Stutchbury, apart from all the questions, did you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I thought I should now open debate on this matter. In fact, I'm not going to debate much, except to say that a couple of years ago, Transport for New South Wales, when they were known as RMS, suggested to the local traffic committee that they were going to put a red light camera on the intersection of Fallon Street and Mate Street. And I just made a somewhat off-the-cuff comment at the meeting. I thought that was an odd place to put a red light camera. And the following week they withdrew it and it never happened. So they've put red light cameras before the committee in the past, but then have withdrawn them after a rather minor argument. Aside from that comment, yes, my debate is now closed.
Thank you. There being no further debate or question, I would put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Minutes of the Murray-Darling Region 1 meeting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes and recommendations of the Murray-Darling Region 1 meeting held on Friday 21st February 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
I do. It was a meeting at the end of which we had a small workshop raising issues which are peculiar to Region 1. Well, they may not be just Region 1, but the issue of pest animals in Region 1 was high on the agenda. Solar on farms, which is clearly a big issue in Greater Hume-shire at the moment and also in Wangaratta, came up. So these matters will be raised at the executive level of the Murray-Darling Association to seek input from the relevant government departments. The other matter that I wanted to bring up, it was not a matter in these minutes, is that the Murray-Darling Association has recently received a grant of $500,000 from the federal government to run a Basin Communities Leadership Program over the next 2 years, covering something like 15 communities from Dirranbandi, St George, Berry, Rochester, Loxton to the Lower Lakes. It's looking for local people who have leadership potential to run projects in their area to deal with the impacts of not just the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, but climate change, drought and other things to rejuvenate their communities. So I am pleased to be part of the Murray-Darling Association and that terrific initiative. Last week we prepared a small video and the Deputy Prime Minister today added his voice to it, and I understand the Minister, Keith Pitt, will do so, and the Prime Minister has been approached to do the same. That program is about to seek applications and will go out in the next few months and run for 2 years.
Excellent. Councillor Gluckin, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Councillor Thurley. Councillor Thurley, you mentioned some areas of particular interest to Region 1, one being pest animals. Can you describe a few different variety of the pest animals you're talking about in particular?
Councillor Thurley.
Yes, it's got nothing to do with councillors on holiday. It's feral goats, horses, pigs, horses, especially in Kosciuszko National Park. They are a serious concern both from a safety point of view. Driving in the evening along the roads in that area is extremely dangerous. But we're also talking about deer and pigs and the damage they're doing. And given that we've had crops and pastures burnt out, these animals are competing big time for any food that is left and is available. That's apart from the damage they do to farm fences, it's apart from the damage they do to water holes and sensitive wetlands in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Minutes of the Companion Animals Advisory Committee meeting are held on the 19th of February. Thank you. Ms Squire, your light's on over there. No, not anymore. Councillor, thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes and recommendations of the Companion Animals Advisory Panel meeting held on Wednesday, 19th of February 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have documents for sealing. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll move the following: that Council authorises the seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the Council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. A. Albury City lease to Flying Fruit Fly Foundation, 605 Hobble Street, Albury, 10-year option commencing 31 July 2020, file 09/01789, and B. Albury City lease to Adecco Australia Proprietary Limited, 3rd floor, 553 Kiva Street, Albury, 1-year option commencing 15 March 2020, file 17/00503.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Very happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Van Dijk, to speak to that?
Definitely not.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13.1, Development Application 10.2019.36698.1, 584 Urena Road, Hamilton Valley. Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move an alternate motion to the one that is in the agenda. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report and B refuse consent to development application 10.2019.36698.1 for 37 lot subdivision at 584 Urena Road, Hamilton Valley, subject to the condition that that's not necessary. Thanks.
Okay, we're wanting a seconder for that motion. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to open your debate?
Yeah.
No conditions attached. Not when you refuse.
Can I start?
Righto. No worries. Off you go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, councillors, to me this is relatively straightforward. In December, a majority of councillors agreed not to accept this DA. That was due to a number of issues. Drainage easement arose to the north and most importantly to myself, tree removal. And those issues have not all been substantively resolved through negotiation, and I don't think we can now accept that DA in essentially a similar form. The developer, in my view, hasn't engaged in those negotiations in good faith. They've simply responded that they don't believe that there's any common ground on the tree issue. We had a majority voice that this DA wasn't good enough in December. They haven't responded to those concerns, and we should now stick to our guns, as it were, and refuse the DA. I understand that there's a question of a 2012 DA for this site that was unfortunately approved. Whether or not that now goes ahead is up to the developer. It's really outside of the hands of this council. But whether or not we approve the development that's before us tonight is, the developer has obviously made a choice not to proceed with that 2012 DA until now, and it's really not my place to speculate as to why they've done that. But the decision before us is really quite straightforward, given the quite minor response to the concerns that we made as a majority of a councillor group in December. We now have to make a decision on what's essentially the same DA, and given that those issues have not been substantially addressed, I believe we should refuse it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have a question before continuing debate. Councillor Van der Ven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you, to the relevant member of staff. If this particular motion succeeds, and hypothetically the developer starts action on his previous development application, what happens to the trees that are currently on site?
Mr Christie?
Thank you and for the question and for you, Mr Mayor. As has been indicated before in past council meetings, as Councillor Con said as well, there is a previous approval from 2012 that does allow removal of all the trees on site. So if they undertook development in accordance with that, then there'll be removal of those trees in accordance with that consent.
So thank you for the answer. So it really begs the question, do we approve this development subject to the changes that have been agreed with the developer, which is basically around the drainage and the access, and have the trees removed, or don't have anything done around the drainage issues or the access issues and have the trees removed anyway? So
is there a question there?
yeah, so the question, if I can be allowed, Mr Mayor, to frame the question, it'd be
Yep.
really appreciated
That's
without
right.
interruption.
Just letting you do that.
Thank you. So the question that I have, Mr Mayor, is the drainage issues and the access issues, were they properly addressed in the original DA that was approved in 2012?
Good question. Mr Christie?
And again, thank you for the question and for you, Mr Mayor. There were conditions in regards to a draft drainage strategy that was provided for the 2012 application, and so the conditions reflected that drainage strategy. So I would say that we believe they were adequately addressed, but more detail provided at the construction certificate stage, which is typical for development applications. In regards to access, if I can just clarify, are you talking about the access to Urana Road, or are you talking about the access to the block to the north?
The block to the north.
Blocks to the north, yep.
Thank you for that clarification. No, there wasn't any provision in the original 2012 consent for access to the property to the north that I can recall at this point.
Yes?
So in terms of the concessions and the agreements that have been made between the developer and the Albury City Council staff, can I have a summary of the benefits of one DA, the old DA, against the new DA in terms of, we already know what's going to happen with the trees. Either both DAs, the trees are going to be removed. So can I have a summary, please, of what the best outcome is in terms of our community from the DA that was approved in 2012 and or the DA that is now before us, even though this is not part of this motion?
Mr Christie?
Again, thank you for the question for you, Mr Mayor. And if I okay to preface it on rather than say what I believe is the best, council staff have obviously recommended we did approve the 2012 under delegation, and we have approved this. So rather than proffer opinion as to what I believe is the best, I'll proffer a description of the main differences between the two consents, if that's okay. Thank you. So the major differences between the two consents are that the first consent in 2012 has an access road out to Urana Road. That removal of the access road provision will require some disturbance, obviously, within Urana Road frontage and within the road reserve. That's not proposed as part of the 2019 application before us. In regards to the property to the north, as I said, from my recollection, there's no provision for access to be provided at that property to north for services and or road access. So the major difference is if that property to the north was to be developed, it would have to utilise its existing access out to Chant Street, which is an existing access but is reasonably constrained in width. The other major difference is in regards to the original DA, there was no additional offset requirements. Part of the negotiation for 2012 DA was that they had previously provided a land swap where dedicated land to the Crown, which has now been part of the Crown lands, environmental lands to come to Albury City. So that was their offset, in essence, for the removal of the vegetation on site. Under the current DA, they're proposing to provide, or council staff have proposed to impose a condition at a 5-to-1 offset planting rate for the trees there to removing on site. That wasn't part of the original consent. So there's a number of other little minor details, but in essence, those are the three major differences between the previous approved consent and the current application before council.
Thank you. Okay, our speaker against, Councillor Stutchbury, you're first one off the ring. You've got a question? Yes, Councillor Thurley.
This application before us right now does not propose to have a drainage reserve, but seeks to have an easement over a particular part of the property. Was the 2012 approval envisaged a drainage reserve?
Mr Christie?
Again, thank you for the question for you, Mr. Nair. No, the 2012 consent didn't have a drainage reserve. There was a draft drainage plan that indicated there was going to be drainage kept through the road and also in one of the large blocks, but it wasn't formally identified as a drainage reserve.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, speaking against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak against this amended motion and foreshadow another, should it fail. I was curious to hear Councillor Con's argument that we should refuse this consent because the proponent had refused to engage us in our requests for improvements. And yet only a month ago, I think we gave consent for a DA at the Woolshed Creek estate, despite the proponent doing absolutely the same thing, only on a much larger scale. So I think an argument that we should refuse it because the proponent's non-responsive is not a valid argument. Look, this is Hamilton Valley. It's not Kakadu. It's not KwaZulu National Park. It's a paddock with a few scraggly trees and a couple of ditches. It's not a thing of beauty. It's zoned for development. The trees that are proposed to be knocked over are largely forward planting. They're not, 500-year-old gum trees that have been here since before Captain Cook sailed into Botany Bay. And sure, we can ask developers to do things, but if they choose not to do those things, as we learnt from the Woolshed Creek estate debacle, we have no power to make them do the things we want them to do. We've got a choice of two DAs here, the 2019 DA or the 2012 DA. It's my view that the 2019 DA is better than the 2012 DA, although they both have their defects. I think that we should just move ahead with the 2019 DA and be done with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a difficult decision, a difficult planning matter, as in my opinion, most planning matters are. I have a couple of issues. The issue of the drainage reserve, where the developer wants to have an easement, that places all of the pressure back on council. We have to ensure that the easement is properly maintained. Council officers would have to continually go there and see that that happens. If it's a drainage reserve, it's in council's power and council has complete control. The other matter which was raised by a speaker at the forum was, yes, we've asked for a 5-to-1 tree replacement, but in the end, I think I don't know how accurate it was, but survival rates of how much, who looks after them, who ensures that the whole 1,940 trees grow, or do we only get a 30% survival rate? I know if they'd have been planted this year, your survival rate would have been 5% at best. So I just think that there were opportunities for the developer to engage. I'm quite bemused by a concept that the proposed subdivision does not allow the retention of these trees. Which was first, the trees or the subdivision? surely there were some elements of design that could have been made to save some of the trees. I understand all of them can't be saved, and I do agree with Councillor Stutchbury that all of them don't warrant being saved. They are forward plantings from AWDC. I went up there over the weekend and had a good look. Some are pretty scrawny, pretty straggly. But if you go to the example of some of the blocks that come down the edge of Urana Road, and I thought I'd written them here somewhere, but anyway, there was the opportunity to trim some of those blocks to retain some of the trees. They didn't have to be right up to the very corner of the allowed subdivision. You could have allowed some space to keep some trees. So on the basis that this development might have achieved something, it hasn't, I would still like to think that this refusal might prompt the developer to try to work with us to achieve a better outcome.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I foreshadow my speaking against or highlight that I would like to foreshadow an alternative motion regarding including fencing if Councillor Stutchbury would like to negotiate or collaborate, I should say, on that. That would be great. I speak against this because, as has already been flushed out by the questions asked this evening, or some of the questions asked this evening, the development has prior approval. And it is my absolute opinion that the existing proposed draft in the documentation we have is better than the prior approval. We have waiting in the wings that the developer has been granted. And the key areas for that are the future access to the rear and also the access issue with Urana Road. I do believe that these developers have negotiated with council. We haven't got everything we want as councillors, or some of us haven't got everything we want as councillors, but I do believe these developers have been sincere in their proposal. They have brought this alternative development back because it will be better for the community, that area and that development, and therefore it's better for them to do this as well. So it is not just for their benefit that they've come to us with this redevelopment plan. They've come to us with these redeveloped plans because it will be better in the future and it will be better for the area and the community. I do believe that we should, and this is why I suggest that we an alternative motion, which would be with approval, and would consider the fencing aspect along Urana Road, as it is a significant entry to our city. Having said that, I trust that should this motion not get up, then we'll have an opportunity to deal with that alternative motion and the fencing in particular. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. There are no further speakers for, but I have another speaker against, Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Gluckin have sort of made most of the points that I wish to make, so I'm not going to belabour the issue. The questions have flushed out what our choices are here, and I'd like everybody in this room to actually tell me how many original trees are still standing in the blocks where they live. Maybe Councillor Stutchbury has some because he's got a fairly large block. I have some because I've got a fairly large block. But I bet you anybody in this particular room that's got a block in our city of between 400 and 800 square metres, not one of the original trees that was on that land is still standing. So why are we talking about this every time? The proponent is going to put 5-to-1 trees back, and when this development goes ahead, in 20 years' time, it will not look anywhere near like what Councillor Con is thinking it's going to look like, because each individual landholder will do their own landscaping with their own trees, and the place will look totally different to what it does now. So from my perspective, the best outcome for us is the development application that is before us, that is the subject of the original motion, not the 2012 DA that we would be faced with having the proponents go ahead with that. So that's where I sit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. No speakers for, speaker against, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Having heard discussion from both sides of the fence, I'm happy to vote against this particular motion, and I look forward to the alternative motion, which was probably the original motion, but I'm interested to hear what Councillor Glacken has to put forward and offer in relation to the fencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There are no further speakers for or against. Councillor Con, did you wish to respond? Close debate.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, to Councillor Stutchbury, thank you for raising Woolstead Estate. Despite that DA going ahead, my position on tree clearing has been entirely consistent for 3.5 years on this council, and I'm going to stick with that position tonight. There's been a lot of discussion as if this is a binary between the 2019 DA versus the 2012 DA. The developer has chosen not to progress that DA for 8 years. I can't say why that is. I'm not sure they'll say publicly why that is, but that's not grounds to accept a subpar DA. And it is a subpar DA because a majority of us agreed it was back in December. I didn't think that we'd have a substantive debate about trees tonight, but it looks like we are, and I'm happy to do that. Look, some of the trees were forward tree planting, but there were 2 large hollow-bearing trees on this site, and they take hundreds of years to grow. We've had presentations from the Albury Conservation Company in this chamber about the benefits of those trees for habitat, for birds, for insects, for animals, for sediment and erosion control, for shade, for microclimate regulation, and that is not replaceable in my lifetime, in Councillor Vanderven's lifetime, or indeed in several. Those are trees that take hundreds of years to replace, and the number of those trees in this subdivision was 2 that we were requesting that the developers would consider retaining, and they haven't met us halfway with 1 or 2 trees, and that's immensely disappointing to me. On top of that, the land being zoned residential means that under biodiversity certification, the forward planting doesn't have to be considered for biodiversity value at all. But that's an enormous shame because of the other benefits of trees that are provided to the community. We've had issues in recent years with sediment runoff from large subdivisions in the Thurgoona-Willinga area that are in part caused by massive tree clearing. There's absolutely no need to clear every single tree on a site to create a subdivision. And again, I'm not opposed to development happening on this land or in this area, but I think we really need to hold our ground on insisting on a better quality of development for the future communities that are going to live there. It puts us in an extraordinarily weak position to insist as a majority that changes be made and then accept the DA, even though those changes haven't been made. And I'm very disappointed that this development seems like it will be going ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I'll now put the motion, and it'll be in the form of a division. Those in favour of the motion, raise your hand. Councillor Con and Councillor Thurley. Those against? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Vanderman. The motion is lost. Councillor Glacken, did you have a foreshadowed motion?
I do. Councillor Stutchbury, are you
I think
okay if...
he didn't push his button.
All right if I put the alternative motion forward? Perhaps we can negotiate on that. Thank you. I move that Council review and note the contents of this report and grant consent to development application 10.2019.36698.1 for 37-lot subdivision at 584 Urana Road, Hamilton Valley, subject to the conditions contained in the draft development consent included in this report as attachment 4. And part C would be with reference to A8 fencing. Fencing along the rear of the property that adjoins Urana Road to be designed as to minimise impact upon the streetscape of Urana Road. In this case, such fencing should be of timber, lapped or capped where possible, and alternatively, if constructed of ColourBond or the like, be of an appropriate colour for the setting, such as pale eucalypt or paper bark, and provided with landscaping to soften the visual impact. A fencing plan is to be submitted to and approved by council prior to the issue of any construction certificate. The fencing plan is to be reflected in section 88B, instrument for the site, with council identified as a party to the covenant.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It would appear once again that I've forgotten to push my button after foreshadowing a motion, and hopefully by the end of this council term I'll remember to do it. The only other thing I was going to add to this amendment was that the 2 hollow-bearing trees should be retained. Despite what Councillor Con thinks, I actually do love trees. I just don't think that forward plantings are worthy of keeping, but hollow-bearing trees are definitely worth keeping, and there's only 2 of them, and I think that they should be retained, and I think that that should be part of the subject conditions, the retainment of 2 hollow-bearing trees. Surely not a big deal.
Councillor Gluckin, did you...
Question first, if I could. I might
Yeah.
clarify this point.
Yes, Councillor Thurley.
It's a question to Mr Christie, I think. Is it possible to include a condition of those 2 trees on lot 6 and 7 be retained as part of the development approval?
Mr Christie.
Again, thank you for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor, yes, it is possible for council to impose a condition as long as it doesn't substantially change to consent. In this case, council may wish to consider whether the trees be kept on the individual lots or whether council requests the consolidation of those 2 lots. As with the trees retained, it would be fairly difficult to develop those 2 lots, so council may wish to impose a condition to require the consolidation of those 2 lots, which would make it a 36-lot subdivision, which is still substantially the same.
Okay. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. I cannot accept that condition of the 2 hollow bearing to be added to this motion. However, and I can explain why. However, I'm wondering if we could deal with, if there's a way in which we could deal with these 2 issues, so the addition of the fencing and the addition of the 2 trees, that they would be, if we would be able to somehow vote on those separately. I believe it is possible, but the wording around that and the way in which we would deal with it, I think, are difficult.
Yeah, look, I think we could start debate on the existing motion that you've included, and then if Councillor Stutchbury wishes to include the trees as an amendment, we can also debate that as well.
As an amendment
to the motion.
and then it would go, if it was approved, it would be included. If
Yeah.
it's not approved, then we would
That's
deal
right.
with this. Thank you
Yep.
very much.
No worries, thank you. Councillor King, do you have a question before we start that
A
process?
question to the relevant member of staff. Are we going to be back here again if A8, the fencing thing, the developer says, I'm not doing that?
Mr Christie.
Again, thank you for the question, and for you, Mr Mayor. If the developer wishes to challenge or request council consider a modification of a condition it's imposed, then the developer does have that right under section 4.55 of the Act to lodge an application with council, and since it was imposed at a council meeting, we would bring it back to council to see whether they considered it appropriate to remove. But they do have the ability under the Act to request council to remove as a modification to the consent.
Comfortable? So, Councillor Gluckin, could you just move the motion and we'll get a seconder and get the ball rolling, and then Councillor Stutchbury can propose an amendment to that motion so we can just debate the
I
amendment.
believe I've
Yep.
moved, if I can
A
speak
seconder?
to.
Yeah, we're waiting for a seconder. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you propose an amendment to this particular item before we start debate? We've almost had a debate already, though.
Why, Mr Mayor, indeed I do propose an amendment to this amendment or motion, that the 2 previously noted hollow-bearing trees be retained as a condition of the DA.
Did you wish to also include Mr Christie's suggestion
and
that the lot be consolidated?
And the blocks be consolidated, yes.
What lots were they, Mr Christie? 6 and 7. Okay. We'll just wait for that to be put up. Excellent. Okay, second for that, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I second Councillor Stutchbury's amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, can you just want to open debate on that amendment? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll keep this brief. I think that this DA deserves to go ahead, and we deserve to get the best we can get from it, and so does members of our community. Councillor Con's quite right. Hollow-bearing trees, hundreds of years of age, and are not replaceable, unlike forward plantings. And I just think that it makes a whole lot of sense to just retain these trees and just make the development just slightly smaller. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a speaker against Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Just to confirm and clarify, I am speaking for the substantive motion, which is A, B and C, above, and C including the fencing, but speaking against A, B, C with the inclusion of D. So I'm speaking against specifically D, retention of the 2 hollow-bearing trees. And I'll explain why I'm speaking against that and why I'm speaking for the substantive motion otherwise. So the 2 hollow-bearing trees, it would be fantastic if we could retain those, and I have asked at previous meetings and in this chamber with absolute view to this development, if it would be possible to retain those trees. If it was possible to retain those trees and somehow build around that element. In fact, I remember asking, could those blocks be put together, consolidated, so that they could build a house around that, around the trees, or move to one part of that block. The answer was that it is not possible to consolidate those 2 blocks and still allow for a significant or an appropriate building envelope. I'm also very conscious of the fact that the developers don't want to, have not at any stage wanted to consolidate those blocks because they know that it will be a financial impact on them. The developers have come to us again to try and make this development better than the original development of 2012. And I am very conscious of the fact that if we do not progress this in a way that is amenable to both council and to the developer, that they will revert to their existing, not just previous, but their existing development application, and they will remove those trees anyway. Because it is not viable for them to consolidate those 2 blocks and still enable an appropriate house to be built on that block. We have already asked them, and they have already told us that it is not possible. Their offer was for us to buy that land at a commercial rate, which we could not afford and would not be for the benefit of our community of Albury if we did so. So I speak against, regretfully, the 2 hollow-bearing trees, and I do so because I speak rationally for this development and for our community. The reason I speak about I raised the fencing is because when we had another meeting about a month or so ago, and we discussed this application, I must say I can't remember exactly which meeting it was, but it was probably a month ago. We've discussed this development application at a number of meetings over a number of months, is because of the concern of the face of Urannah Road raised in this chamber, the face of Urannah Road, which is a significant entrance to our city, if it's not dealt with sympathetically. And I believe this motion, as has been discussed with the staff, including that fencing item there enables the developer sufficient manoeuvrability to be able to come up with a design that will enable something that is a little better to look at for our community. I mean, clearly there will be some sort of fence, so if we can make that as aesthetically pleasing as possible and combine that within the existing area, that's terrific. And I believe that the developer will be happy. I believe they would prefer to be able to have something that's a better outcome because they're local developers and that development is known as theirs. So I believe they would be quite amenable to the fencing as an option. I believe we should have dealt with this some months ago, and whilst Councillor Con says that it was the decision in December was a majority of council, it doesn't mean that it was a unanimous decision of council. And I think we should have dealt with this some time ago, and I feel that we as councillors are creating red tape. We're not creating red carpet, and we tell our staff that they need to be providing red carpet and not red tape for our residents and our developers. We need to be walking the talk, not just talking the talk. So I speak against the inclusion of D, but for the substantive motion that includes A, B and C, including the fencing at C. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking in favour of Councillor Stutchbury's proposed amendment, Part D. I wasn't intending to speak to this again, but my recollection to the answer of the questions that Councillor Glackens described differs to Councillor Glackens, and I thought we needed to have that discussion. I recall questions being asked about the possibility of retaining the trees at a previous meeting, the answer being that the only way to do so would be to consolidate the two blocks, that if we left the trees on individual blocks, that there was no possibility of a building envelope there, but by consolidating the blocks that we would be able to practically. However, this was not acceptable to the developer due to their loss of income, which at the end of the day is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to the community that has to live here in the future. I also recall that the offer of blocks at a commercial rate was for the forward tree planting on Urana Road and didn't relate to the two trees that we're now discussing. So I think we need to stick to discussing the amendment that's actually before us, which is about two trees. And I think it would be quite unreasonable to consider that, an unacceptable level of red tape.
Thank you, Councillor Con. We have no further speakers against the amendment, but I speak for Councillor Thurley.
I speak for the whole amendment, including item D. Careful examination of the plan shows that if lots 6 and 7 were combined, there's plenty of building envelope available. The developer certainly doesn't want to consolidate the two lots, and there is no doubt that with two separate lots you cannot retain those trees and have a sufficient building envelope. But when they are combined, those trees are significantly far apart and there's plenty of space. So the loss of one block in this subdivision, yes, I know the developer wants to make the maximum profit he can. I don't deny that. If I were in business, I'd be wanting to do the same. But there are other factors here, and this is one about amenity, about hollow trees, and I believe that this amendment will give us the best result for a very small penalty to the developer out of the loss of one lot, in fact. So I would vote in favour of the whole amendment A, B, C and D.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak to your amendment?
I actually thought I already had, but...
Close the debate.
Yes. Oh, well, let's consider the debate closed.
Thank you. Now I'll put the amendment. Those in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Those against the amendment? We're going to call a division on this, on an amendment. I don't know about that. We'll do it again. Those in favour of a division, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vanderman. Those against, Councillor Doxey and Councillor Glacken. The amendment is 1, so it's included as part of the motion. Okay, so I'm happy to put the motion as it sits. Those in favour of the motion in terms of a division, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor King, Councillor Gluckin, Councillor Thurling, Councillor Vanderman. Those against, Councillor Con. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, we have now CM 13.2, the Albury CBD Promotional Special Levy Review Outcomes. Thank you, Councillor King.
Yes, through Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that the council, A, receive and note the findings of the 2019-20 Promotional Special Rate Review. B, continue the Albury CBD Promotional Special Rate for 4 years, bracket 2020-2024, bracket, applying the rate peg increase each year. And C, consider a 4-year strategic plan and funding proposal from Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce for management of the promotional special rate funds and delivery of the Albury CBD promotional activities.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, did you wish to open debate?
Yes, first of all, I'm very, very concerned that a lot of weight with the report from the council staff is on Woolcock research and engagement. It seems that less than 5% of the people who were are in this PSR area actually gave a response. There's plenty of examples of 10%, 15% and 20% of 40 people. I don't think it's indicative of the general feeling of the CBD people. I had concerns that I raised with the council over the Lavington area CCTV survey last time, where we went out and we specifically went and spoke to people at a specific time at the Lavington shopping centre. We got a specific result from this. You know, I would like to see these types of surveys actually done by people, where they go out, they go into the shop, they talk to the shopkeeper, and they actually get feedback, not on a computer screen, not and these people doing their reports at 7 o'clock at night after they've been up and working 12 hours a day and doing their books and doing their ordering and dealing with the general public, which can be a drag sometimes, and then have to sit down and actually put something that we then rely on to get this motion over the line. I often walk down Dean Street in the areas and am a great customer of the CBD and like to get some feedback from the shop owners, and as the council staff are no doubt acutely aware, I pass that feedback back to them, and hopefully they act upon it. So I think Dean Street and the CBD is in need of some real help. It's the heart of Albury, no doubt the oldest street in Albury, and I move this motion to ensure that that we monitor the levy appropriately, and that certainly our CBD does need as much help as it can possibly get at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Stutchbury, you wish to speak for?
Yes, I do wish to speak for this, but I also would like to propose an amendment which I'm hoping Councillor King would agree to. My amendment would be that we change the duration from 4 years down to 2 years for both the promotional special rate and also the strategic plan. And so if I can ask Councillor King.
Councillor King?
I would like Councillor Stutchbury to expand a little bit on his reasonings, please.
Councillor Stutchbury?
Well, Councillor King, I entirely agree with you that Dean Street and the CBD are, the heart and soul of commerce in Albury-Wodonga, and also the centre of the city, and it needs to be as good as it can be. And at the moment, frankly, it's not as good as it can be. It's a long way from as good as it can be. And if we give our staff 4 years to faff about with a, bit of a strategic plan, then they'll spend 4 years faffing about, and at the end of the 4 years, we'll have all forgotten about this, that and the other, and it won't be the quality that we want, and it won't be coming in the timeliness that we want. I want to see some dramatic improvements to Dean Street in 2 years, not 4 years. In fact, in 1 year, not 2 years, but I'm proposing 2 years to be reasonable.
I'd just like to focus your attention. It is the Albury Northside Chamber's responsibility to flap about, as you put it.
Yeah. That's what I meant when I said council
Thank you.
staff. I meant
Councillor King, are you comfortable with that amendment?
That was a very wise amendment from Councillor
So you're happy to
Stutchbury
change it to 2 years,
to 2 years.
2020
Yes.
to 2022, and consider a 2-year strategic plan?
Yes.
Excellent. There you go. There's the motion. Okay. We have a question from Councillor Doxley and Councillor Glacken. Councillor Doxley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Apart from insulting staff, can I simply ask the Acting General Chief Executive Officer what this impact actually has on the way ahead for us? Thank you.
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The strategic plan's been developed by the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce in order to deliver promotional activities across the CBD for the 4 years. I guess that the potential impacts are that they may not achieve their key KPIs within the first 2 years. But, certainly the 4-year strategic plan that they have prepared and presented to council for consideration could still be implemented if the intention here is to approve the collection of the promotional special rate for 2 years as opposed to 4 years, and it can then continue to support the implementation of the strategy for the first 2 years as it's been presented to council tonight.
B needs to be changed to 2 years. It says 4 at the moment. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay. Councillor King, you have a question before you open debate, or?
I've opened debate. Yes, I have a question. How much, to the relevant member of staff, how much did this Walcott report cost?
Mr Glass.
I'll take that question on notice for exact answer. Thank you for the question, Councillor King, through you, Mr Mayor. If I could just take that one on notice, please. I'll just give you that.
Thank you. Okay. You can, yes.
Regardless of the amount, who would have paid the bill?
Thank you for the question, Mr Mayor. It came through the Economic Development Team, so Albury's Council. Yep.
Okay. Open debate. Councillor Glacken will speak against.
Thank you. I support the original motion that we continue the CBD promotional special rate for 4 years. And I'm happy to support, if we were to revert back to the 4 years, I'd support that and foreshadow a motion accordingly. I'm concerned that we're trying to get organisations to deal with their strategic plan in a compressed period of time, and they won't be able necessarily to achieve what they wish to be able to do. So if we could agree, for example, if we could modify this motion on that you have on the board, Councillor King and Councillor Stutchbury, to be that we approve it for 4 years, but we review, have a scheduled review after a further 2 years. So in 2 years we have a halfway review, and then the final review after the 4 years. I would absolutely support that. Wouldn't have a problem with it. But I think to be cutting this down adds all sorts of pressure. It also means that there'll need to be a review of the process, or the process we've just gone through, going out to the public, will need to happen again in 2 years' time to review whether or not we as council will fund that.
I believe that part of the reason for the low rate of return, because significant attempts were made to engage people within that designated area. Significant attempts were made to engage them, but they didn't engage. And as all of us, I suggest, around the table appreciate, if the community's not happy about something, we hear about it. And we will get complaints if they wish to complain. So when I read this, I thought that's unfortunate that they have not responded, have not engaged, not due to the fact that there were not attempts made to engage them, but because they had no reason to, they felt they had no reason to engage. They didn't wish to complain. So I believe, and reading further into the document, it was interesting that most of the people who did engage, they engaged to say that it wasn't an appropriate application imposed on them because they weren't part of the CBD retail market per se. It was because they didn't think their businesses fitted under that umbrella. So I don't agree with the 4 years. The 2 years, I agree with, I would prefer us to have the 4 years, and I believe that people haven't engaged because they didn't need to engage. They felt they didn't need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I support the motion with 2 years. The catastrophically low response rate to the survey, I don't believe is any fault of our staff at all, but it means that we can't draw any meaningful conclusions from it. So I think it would be irresponsible to stop what we're doing as a result of that survey. I also think it would be irresponsible to carry on for 4 years and pretend that we didn't fail to get feedback. So I think carrying on for 2 years and re-evaluating sooner is really the most sensible thing to do.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm of the view that the low response rate to the survey was on the basis of if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I think what this motion is going to do is make it more difficult for the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce to do their job, because they're going to have to take time out of their working for the community in a volunteer capacity to go away and go through this whole process and application process and justification process when we've got to a situation where they presented a very good 4-year strategic plan, which we had as part of our I think briefings a week or two ago. So I see no reason to vote for this, especially on the basis that it's going to take focus away from them doing the job that they're very good at doing, and that is promoting the Central Business District. So I would be voting against this and looking forward to having the original motion come up for decision.
Thank you. Just a question, Ms Squire, in relation to the work that is done on that 4-yearly basis by the Albury Northside Chamber, how, apart from the 4-year plan that they've already presented, is there any other work? It would appear that we do a fair bit of it. Is that correct?
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. What the Albury CBD Group and the Chamber do need to prepare is the supporting analysis of what they've done over the term of that we're asking the ratepayers to confirm their satisfaction with and willingness to continue to support. So they provide an overview of what outcomes they've achieved and then what they plan to do for the forward period. So they certainly do have to put work into communicating that really clearly and packaging that up, and then essentially that supports our review in that we use that as a tool to then go out, talk to the ratepayers, provide them with that documentation and ask them to respond to the questions we're asking, having been informed by that body of work.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Speaker against, councillor Thurley, no speakers for.
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. I speak in favour of Councillor King's original motion, that is on the basis of 4 years. We know right now that retail is in a pretty dismal state all across Australia. This is not going to be fixed in 6 months, 1 year or even 2, and we need to have a long-term vision and allow the chamber to have that same long-term vision to look at how we support retail in this city. I can understand why people think we should do it in 2 years, but this is longer term. Councillor King's original motion, I support fully. Retail is not going well in this city, but have a look at any other city and you'll see much the same. We've got to have an innovative, so we've got this special rate levy and the chamber working in this space. So I believe that this is the way we should go, and we should give them the time necessary to achieve a result. Not 2 years, but the original 4-year motion.
Thank you, councillor Thurley. There appears to be no other speakers for or against. I might just use this.
Sorry, Mr Mayor.
Did you want to speak for it? This is very unusual.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
Mr Mayor.
right.
I just wanted to provide the councillors with clarification. What you're considering here is whether you want to continue to collect the promotional special rate levy and whether you want to receive or consider a proposal from the Albury North side for how that rate levy would be expended, which is the next item on the agenda. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear that that is what you're considering right now. It's not who the rate funds that are collected are paid to. It's simply whether or not you wish for us to raise the promotional special rate levy for a 4-year period.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Ms Squire. Just in finishing, considering the pressure that is currently on the retail sector in this country, I do agree with councillor Thurley and councillor Vanderman that we need to give the Northside Chamber an opportunity to perform and certainly put a sense of urgency on that performance. So to that end, prior to the debate starting, felt the 2-year period was reasonable, given that they are funds that are transparent and raised through another process. But I didn't mind what Councillor Glacken included was that a review be conducted in 2 years' time, not 4 years' time. There is regular reviews with them at an executive level, but I think we need to place a sense of urgency on what that review looks like. So there is a level of accountability and it achieves both objectives. So I think in that respect, I would probably support that option and remain with the 4 years. So thank you. Councillor King, did you wish to close debate?
Look, I hear what Councillor Stutchbury's saying. I think we do need I sort of weirdly agree with Councillor Glacken now that I thought I'd say that that it's more about an update, I suppose, to see how things are tracking. So so the procedure is move the motion, an amendment.
No, you just move the
Move the
original
motion. All right. I move that council. I've already moved
committed
it, right.
So we'll just put this motion, and then if it's lost, councillor Glacken can foreshadow and move the original motion. Okay, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Thank you for turning my light on. Through you to move the original motion.
Yes, thank you.
And I would ask...
Once we get that on the screen, we can move it.
I will ask Ms Squire to consider before I read this out where we might be able to put in an appropriate point to confirm that we would like an additional mid-review. Okay, so to move that Council receive and note the findings of the 2019-20 promotional special rate review, B, continue the Albury CBD promotional special rate for 4 years, 20 to 24, applying for the rate peg increase each year. And C, consider a 4-year strategic plan and funding proposal from Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce for management of the promotional special rate, funds to be and delivery of the Albury CBD promotional activities. And D, for an additional midway review.
So D would be review.
To be undertaken.
4-year strategic plan after 2 years. Midpoint.
Yep.
Mr Mayor, it might be useful to think if you're wanting to review the collection of the promotional special rate levy, or are you wanting to review the performance of the expenditure and investment of that levy? If it's the latter, then my suggestion would be that in considering the next report, you include an additional requirement to have a mid-term agreement review presented for council consideration.
Excellent. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to speak to that, the
If I
original
can get a
motion?
seconder, I'd love to.
Yes. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Glacken.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Many of us added to the debate, and it was interesting to listen to that debate and to get an appreciation for the perhaps slight lack of awareness or slight misunderstanding of the actual rate and how it's applied, who collects that rate, and indeed what the outcome is with that rate. It is, as Councillor Thurley said in his debate, it is a special rate that not all cities impose or have access to. It's a special rate with a particular purpose, and it is not that rate that, or that rate is not the rate that will go to deal directly. It can indirectly assist with, but it doesn't directly deal with the aspects that I believe Councillor King is alluding to in the CBD, and that is a significant number of businesses or stores that are vacant. I believe that's what Councillor King has as a major concern. So it's not this rate, or this rate is not directly applicable to that. So I think it appropriate that we enable this to continue. I really strongly believe that the lack of response was because people didn't feel they needed to make comment. They don't have a problem with it, or they don't have a problem in as much as they feel they have to air that problem. How we deal with people responding in the future, in 4 years' time, I really don't know, but in 4 years' time we'll have another go at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. There being no further speaks for or against, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.3, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move a slightly amended motion, so bear with me, Becky. It's only a couple of numerical changes. That Council enter into a sponsorship and financial assistance service agreement with Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce for the period 1 July 2020 to 30 June 2022, and include the following. Did you get that? A, sponsorship of $141,125 ex GST for the provision of business development services in 2021, reducing by $5,000 per annum in year 2, full stop. And B, all funding collected by Albury City under the promotional special rate for the delivery of the Albury CBD promotion and activation services indexed in line with the New South Wales Government approved rate peg in year 2. Full stop.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to second that?
No, I don't, Mr Mayor.
Your light was on, that was
Yeah,
on.
I know.
Councillor King.
I'll second that. Thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to open debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this is largely a continuation of the previous debate. The centre of Albury is stagnating. Nothing much seems to be happening there, and the people responsible for it are us, and the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce, and we all need to crack the whip and get on with what needs to be done there. And waiting 4 years is really just too long. Despite what happened with the previous motion, I think 4 years is too long, and I think we need to see some action a bit sooner on this matter. The centre of town really does need to be a hell of a lot better than it is now, and it needs to get better quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. I have speakers against. Councillor Thurley.
I find it difficult to understand what Councillor Stutchbury's point is. We've said that this is an important concept, this sponsorship and the special rate review. All we're saying here is we're going to guarantee to the Albury Northside Chamber that we'll sponsor them for 4 years with certain conditions which are in the original motion. I can't support the change. We've already talked about in the previous one we'll go for the 4 years. So here we are. We should continue this sponsorship for 4 years at a known rate so they know where they're going.
Thank you. Speaker against. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. To speak against this motion because it deals with 2 years and 2 years. I foreshadow that should this motion be lost, that I would be reverting back to the original motion, that it be for 4 years and 4 years, and that we would add an item C, that a midway review of the promotional special rate review, promotional special rate be reviewed 2 years.
This has nothing to do with the special rate. This is about sponsorship.
Correct. And that would then enable the Chambers of Commerce to deal with their program over the next 4 years. We would then be enabling them to have 4 years assistance from us, so they've got continuity, and we would be giving them 4 years for the promotional special rate, but after the 2 years, we would review the program in particular with this promotional special rate and how they're applying it in the city, is my suggestion. I cannot support us providing the Chambers of Commerce with only 2 years sponsorship, and nor can I support that the 4-year promotional special rate be given to the Chambers of Commerce for only 2 years. I think it inappropriate. I think it is asking, again, the Chambers of Commerce to come to us in 2 years' time, less than 2 years' time, and make their representation to us. As Councillor Thurley has quite rightly pointed out, the whole of Australia is dealing with the same issue in their retail areas. There is a downturn in retail. We know that. The City of Albury knows that, and so does the Chambers of Commerce. We should not be penalising the Chambers of Commerce for what is not completely within their gift. They don't own those properties that are vacant on Dean Street as we talk about them. They don't own those properties. They can assist, as they do, to try and enable people to take up those areas. They assist with the promotion of the CBD, but they cannot put tenants in those spaces. I believe we should be having 4 years for both of those items, an addition of C, a midway review of the promotional special rate being administered by the Chambers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Another speaker against, no speakers for. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just a little confused with Councillor Stutchbury's comments about wanting this to happen now, wanting action now. If he was serious in that regard, he would have doubled the sponsorship that Albury City offers to the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce, and that would actually perhaps have some impact in, if he wants some action now, not moving a motion that halves the number of years of the sponsorship and halves the number of years of the collection of the Albury City rate. So I can't vote in favour of this, and I would be supporting a motion to go back to the original motion should this particular motion fail.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor King.
I'm speaking for Councillor Stutchbury's motion. I think what Councillor Vanderman said is that in 2 years' time, the Chamber of Commerce are more than able to come back to the council and request a doubling of the sponsorship. I think locking it in for 4 years is probably a little bit far-sighted, I suppose. 4 years is a long time, you know. Even 2 years is a long time. So if you looked at it, the positive aspect of it, that that the sponsorship, and look again, I say Albury, Dean Street and Kiwar and David and Oliver are the heart of Albury, and you know we're just as responsible as the Albury North Side as well, and we need to take a fair bit of the blame of the condition of the street. I mean, there's a dirty great pothole right out in front of 2E2 Square that I've got photos of that's been there for months and months and months, full of water, you know. So it's our main drag, you know, and it looks really, really sad. So I'm supporting this. It's not to give any lack of vote of confidence in the Albury North Side Chamber of Commerce. It's just to say in 2 years' time, come back and you may get, as Councillor Vanna said, double the amount.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Vanderman?
I don't like to be misquoted. That is not what I said.
Okay.
Thank you, just for the
Thank you.
record.
No worries. There are no further speakers for or against. I might just make a comment in relation to this item that we've been sitting here since 2012. We put requirements on previous boards and previous iterations of the Albury Northside Chamber to reduce their reliance on council funding, and we ourselves have also imposed sanctions on them and reduced their funding ourselves because we didn't believe that they were working to what we believe they should be, increasing their membership. I'd like to also add that this is not just about Albury CBD, this is the business development of Albury, the greater Albury region, and certainly Albury Northside Chamber do a great job in terms of that entire footprint. However, I would have thought membership could have improved in the last 6 to 7 years, and I would think that a 2-year turnaround on this particular sponsorship would not be unreasonable, and it would probably encourage a bit more of a different approach to what I agree are difficult times for Australia's economy, but we also need to give value for money in terms to our ratepayers and to our community. And I don't disagree with Councillor King. We need to also contribute in terms of our assets, but I think we seem to have a pretty good city and we keep it up at a very high standard. But we need to do the same thing that we expect of them. But I can see value in the 2-year period. I can see that it sends a message, but I'll be guided by what the result of the motion is. Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor, if I can ask the most relevant member of staff, what would other councils of a similar size to Albury pay for the work undertaken by the Albury Northside Chambers of Commerce on our behalf in the business community? What would that cost to those councils for those councils who are doing that job internally themselves? Please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Glacken, and through you, Mr Mayor. It is difficult to draw comparisons with other chambers because of the varied success of different chambers. I draw your attention to some stats here. There was 3,888 people attended chamber events during the last financial year, 461 different businesses represented. I'm not sure if we can compare with other similar sized cities but Albury's Northside Chamber of Commerce is renowned as being one of the more active chambers of commerce in New South Wales. I understand that their total turnover is $457,000 in expenses, of which 74,000 is $70,000 is in their office lease, etc. They've got 4 people employed with a value of approximately $250,000. Difficult one to draw some comparisons with other cities.
Follow up.
Can I ask a follow-up? I think I recall that some years ago, might be 8 or even 12 years ago, when Councillor Van and I were first on council, we did ask staff, and I can't remember what the answer was, but I think it was perhaps Ms Squire who was in that position at the time, and she was able to answer. If we could check what that was, please.
Can you recall what that was?
Through you, Mr Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor Glacken. Certainly my recollection is it was, if we were looking at the volume of activities that are delivered by the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce, and there was no intention to scale down those activities, certainly it was somewhere in the vicinity of 400,000 from my recollection. And if you think about the number of staff that they're employing to deliver what they're delivering, in addition to business operating costs, certainly Albury City would not get the benefit of the depth and breadth of that activity for $141,000.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the purpose of my amendment to this motion was not to try and punish or kick the Albury Northside Chamber of Commerce. My objective was to stir them into action and get things moving as quickly as possible. So that's what I'm hoping will happen once this motion has been made successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. On that note, I'll put the motion. Those in favour of the motion? Those against? It's a casting vote, and I vote for the motion. Thank you. The motion is carried. 13.4, the Albury-Wodonga Regional Cricket Facility Stage 2 funding request. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council approve the request from City of Wodonga to contribute a further $137,500 towards Stage 2 of the Albury-Wodonga Regional Cricket Facility and include the funding in the Financial Assistance Community Fund for Council consideration during the 2020-21 budget process.
Thank you. We'll just wait for that to appear. Is that correct?
Yes.
Recommendation 3.
Correct.
Thank
That's
you.
option 3.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'd like to second that, but I wonder if Councillor Con might consider a minor amendment to it, which is that this is pending successful grant applications from Sport and Rec Victoria and the Cricket Infrastructure Fund.
Yep, you're okay with that. We'll just wait for that to be included. comfortable with that, Councillor Con?
Yep.
Do you wish to open debate? I have a question. Can you open debate and I'll take the question, Councillor Con?
Yeah, sure. Look, we've just had a presentation from Michael and Reece, who are far more qualified than I am to comment on the benefits of this project for the cricket community. From my own perspective, I think it's got great benefits for health and socially within our community, getting young people into sport, getting young people into competitive sport, and also supporting girls and women in a growing sport. So I think it's very obvious that this project benefits the whole community and the whole region, and really we need to be walking the talk on the Two Cities, One Community project. The fact that this is in Wodonga is really irrelevant to me. I think this is going to have a huge benefit to the Albury community as well. Looking at where the Cricket Albury Wodonga is up to with having to seek grants from other levels of government, we know from recent events in the media that that's obviously a very challenging process and may take some time. I think if the City of Wodonga, Cricket Albury Wodonga, Sport and Recreation Victoria, the Australian Cricket Infrastructure Fund all agree that a project is worthwhile, who on earth are we to delay that project from going ahead? So I would urge councillors to support this motion tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Question, Councillor Glacken?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff. Earlier today, I emailed staff and asked, are there any examples of the City of Wodonga having contributed financially to a facility in Albury City Council, or of Albury City Councils? Are there any examples where we've requested their financial assistance to a facility that is ours? Either we've requested and not received, or we've requested and received. Regretfully, the email was misinterpreted, and it was answered with regards to have Cricket Albury Wodonga, not the City of Wodonga, contributed. And the Cricket Albury Wodonga have, but has the City of Wodonga contributed financially to infrastructure in the City of Albury?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we'd need to take that on notice, and apologies if we misunderstood the question earlier today, Councillor Glacken. We thought you were inquiring about Cricket Albury Wodonga's contribution to our facilities, which, as explained, there's been numerous examples where they've either received grant funding independently or contributed either cash or in kind to upgrades of our local facilities.
Councillor King, you have a question?
Yes, whilst Mr Ferris is doing that, he could also see if Albury's contributed anything to Wodonga, apart from this amount.
Mr Ferris, you okay to check that as well?
Through Mr Mayor, that'll be
Thank
fine.
you. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I sit here listening to Two Cities, One Community, and have they given us anything? Have we given them anything? Let's just forget Two Cities, One Community and say, go your own way and we don't care. For God's sake, we've signed an agreement, Two Cities, One Community. Stop whinging and asking, did they give us anything? Did we give them anything? The cricket people are here tonight, got a great proposal, a great project with a lot of passion. Let's get on with it. Let's pass this motion and get something happening. I don't give a damn whether Wodonga, this project, Two Cities, One Community, has only been going for a short time. I'm not going to look over the fence. This is what New South Wales government and Victorian government have been doing for the last 50 years, and it's got us nowhere, so let's not us get involved in it.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, Speaker 4.
All I can say to that is hear, hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, Speaker 4.
Well said, Councillor Thurley, and Councillor Glacken, I'm disappointed in your question to staff.
Thank you.
Say that you're disappointed in Councillor King's response.
Excuse me, councillors, let's not digress into some sort of to and fro, please. Confine it to the debate at hand, thanks. Councillor Glacken, you wish to speak for?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interestingly, the reason I asked the question was because I wanted to show examples of why we should be supporting this. So, Councillor Stutchbury, I think you really need to consider what you say against another councillor before that councillor has actually had an opportunity to speak. The reason I'm asking is because I've had a number of communications in person as well from people that live both in Wodonga and Albury complaining that Wodonga is asking for this money. In essence, it is an issue that has been going on for far too long. We have assigned this agreement, 2 cities, 1 community, and I have been absolutely supportive of this. Thank you. The issue is that it hasn't progressed as well yet as the speakers for cricket, Albury Wodonga, actually explained themselves. It hasn't been finalised yet. And to be agreeing this now is a little difficult, but we have great faith, well, I have great faith in the cricket community being able to ensure that this facility is a very positive facility. It's great that we're able to support collaboratively because it halves the cost for either of the 2 cities. The disappointing thing is that this is yet another example of our community not being quite supportive as they might be. It's an example of us as councillors will be beaten up if we support it and will be beaten up if we don't support it by the community. And again, we have to show that leadership. I'm very happy to support us giving that leadership, but I also want to ensure that we can highlight to our community that this is not, again, Albury giving further money to this development because we have already previously given money to this development. I want to show our community on both sides of the river that it is the 2 cities who are both collaborating, not just on this, but on other ventures as well. So that's why I'm asking the question of our staff, what have we been asked money for? What have we provided money for, and what has the City of Wodonga been provided, and what have they provided for as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Another speaker for Councillor King.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm supporting this. First, I want to apologise for lowering myself in response to Councillor Glacken's question. Mr. Ferris, you don't need to provide me with that information. Look, just read the name. Albury Wodonga Regional Cricket Facility. We've got branding rights. It's in the name. As the eloquent Mr. Ertlejack has said, 60% of junior participants will come from Albury. Again, it doesn't matter where it is. I'm sure down the track there will be something that Wodonga will contribute to in Albury, and Councillor Thurley's quite right, you know. This is really the first one. This is a big test, and for this 2 cities, 1 community to work, we should be looking at the big picture. As I said previously, Albury Wodonga is a regional capital, and we have to talk big. We have to promote these type of events. As Mr. Ertlejack said, there's tournaments and events and everything. All cricket is around here, which means that all the hotels are full, all the caravan parks are full. All of the restaurants are full. The over 70s coming, the over 60s, the over 50s, junior cricket. If we want to make a statement of where we sit in the map in Australia, this is a great segue into it. So I'm supporting it 100%. And again, I apologise.
Thank you, Councillor King. We have no further speakers for or against. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's get on with it.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. That motion is carried, and we have no officers' reports for noting, no delegates' reports for noting. Councillors, anyone with any notice of urgent business? No? Okay, no confidential matters. The meeting is closed at 8:19. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff.